Well, hi and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to just share a little bit. I mean, you can't be on this channel for very long before you find out that I put quite a bit about Christianity on here and the different things that I believe and shape my belief, and various sermons and things that I've heard and recorded, and some of my own even. So mostly I talk a lot about photography, but as I mentioned in my introduction to this YouTube channel, I believe we are all three-dimensional people, and we need to consider all those three dimensions: the body, the soul and the spirit. So today is one of those spirit dimensions that I'm considering today, and I just thought I'd share a little bit about my background in becoming a Christian. I was 28 when I became a Christian, and why I am associated with the denomination that I am, even though it's a sort of a loose association at the moment in some ways. So I'm going to share a little bit. There have been lots of movements over the centuries in Christianity ever since Jesus died on the cross and rose again. And some of them have been good, some of them have been bad, some of them have been sects, some of them have caused a lot of trouble. And but by and large, when you get true Christianity, there's nothing better, although people would dispute that if they're on the other side of the equation. So my wife and I go back to in the 1970s, when we were influenced by a movement called the Jesus movement, I guess. The one-way movement is what it was. They had a symbol of the finger pointing up in the air. Or I think it was sort of, I don't know how it went, like that somehow. A one-way movement, which people would consider a bit of a rude gesture these days, I guess. But anyway, we were influenced by that movement, and there were people in it. A lot of the music was a big influence. At that time, the gospel music that was coming out of some of these churches, particularly in America at the time, were really quite good. And we still have some of that music here, and so that was a big influence on us as well. But there were people became Christians who were highly profile people around about that time. I think it was a bit before that time. Cliff Richard became a Christian. Paul Stookey of Peter, Paul and Mary became a Christian. Barry Maguire of that famous protest song The Eve of Destruction became a Christian. So a lot of people were influenced by that movement, and we were too. And so around about that time, my wife was going to church, I wasn't, and eventually I came to go to the same church. And the church was a Church of Christ, which is a denomination, I guess. Which, when it started out, it didn't want to be a denomination. It was just an organisation that was trying to restore New Testament Christianity how it was in the Bible, because the founders of the Churches of Christ were disgusted with all the things that were going on in the name of Christianity in the various denominations and churches, and some of them were really weird. I have an old family Bible here which has got a list of all the different denominations that were around, particularly in America, around about the time, a couple of hundred years or more ago, of the Restoration Movement is what it was called. Got off the ground, and if you looked at some of those, you'd think was no wonder everyone was in confusion, and there was a lot of strife, and some things that were happening weren't very Christian. So anyway, I'm going to share a little bit. I've probably rambled on a bit too much already, of why I am associated with the churches simply known as Churches of Christ. At the moment, my wife and I lead a congregation in a nursing home, which has an association with the Churches of Christ, but it's not actually a constituted church, if you like. But we conduct our meetings the same way as Churches of Christ do in their churches, and we also attend another normal Churches of Christ body group in a church not far from where we live on a fortnightly basis, because the other church is only on a fortnightly basis at the moment. So we've still got a connection. We're not formally members at the moment of Churches of Christ in an actual location, but we are by our baptism into Christ. And one of the main things that Churches of Christ always used to try and get across was and that we are not the only Christians, but Christians only. We don't want to be called anything other than a Christian. So I've got a little pamphlet here. Why I'm associated with, I don't know whether you can see that or not, yeah, with Churches of Christ, with the churches known simply as Churches of Christ. It's by someone, one of the original ministers, and his name was G.T. Fitzgerald. He was a minister in the Churches of Christ. I'll just read a little bit out of it, and I'll just touch on the headings. Incidentally, one of the main founders of the, before I start, of Churches of Christ was an American man and his son called Alexander Campbell and his son Thomas Campbell. No, sorry, Thomas Campbell and his son Alexander Campbell. And they formed this group in America and in England, and then eventually came to Australia and Scotland and everything. This book is called, I think you might better read it there, The Christian System by Alexander Campbell. And this is where a lot of the tenets of Churches of Christ are written down, although things have changed over the years, as they do in all movements, things change. So I'm going to read a little bit about this. This article is, and you may not be a Christian at all watching this, I'm just wondering if it will pique your curiosity. I'm going to put some links underneath to where you can read some of the articles written by the early people in Australia on Churches of Christ, some of their thoughts. Some of those thoughts might have changed a bit since then, but there'll be a link. It's a wonderful resource I'm going to put below down here in the text. So here we are, a preliminary. I'm going to read a little bit of this. I'm not going to go too long on all this stuff. This article is not written as a criticism of other Christians. If the Christians now scattered throughout the various religious bodies are ever to fulfill the will of Jesus Christ and be united as prayed for by him, this is in John 17, 21 to 23, you can look that up. We must learn to understand each other better. Unkindly criticisms only widen the breach that separates us. None of us cares to be misunderstood, hence none of us should be content to misunderstand others. Try to understand your neighbour and you will be understood is a truth well worth considering. So some of the things what he's written down, and I would probably endorse most of these, I think. Churches of Christ is a changing movement. They don't have quite exactly the same ethos that they once had. I just read the headings. I probably should photocopy this one and make it available as a PDF. I am associated with Churches of Christ known simply as Churches of Christ because they have no God but the Bible. The whole idea of Churches of Christ is to get back to the Bible and restore. The restoration movement was to restore what the Bible was actually teaching us. What's number 2 here? Because they, where the scriptures do not clearly reveal the will of God, stand for liberty of conscience. Liberty of conscience. One of their sayings was, where the Bible speaks, we speak, and where it doesn't speak, we remain silent. Of course, people don't stick to that, do they? Because they honour Christ by wearing his name for the church. In other words, a lot of churches have different names, and I won't mention some of them, but they all call themselves something different. But Churches of Christ simply honour Christ by using his name as part of it, so we're either called Churches of Christ or Christians. So that's where that one comes from. And that just goes on to say, because they refuse to wear any name but Christ's name for the individual follower of Christ. In other words, I'm a Christian. Because they honour Christ as head of the church. That's quite clear when you get into the New Testament. Because they honour Christ by refusing to adopt any human-made creeds. No creed but Christ. Well, that's fair enough, but I actually find some of the creeds that have been written over the years quite helpful, and I would have very little problem with some of the major creeds that are around the world in Christianity. Because they honour Christ by practicing the baptism authorised by him and his